Welcome to another Blue Book podcast from Seniors Serving Seniors in Victoria, British Columbia. On today's podcast, Executive Director Vicki Pilot is in conversation with Karla Kerr. Karla is a holistic funeral director located in Victoria. Sometimes referred to as a death doula, Karla helps and advises us about the natural process of dying. Her advice is to start with honest conversation about the process, and she believes we should plan and talk about death well before it becomes imminent. Karla and Vicki have a wide-ranging discussion about death and the necessary preparations for it.
So we're really happy to have you here today. The topic of death and dying and transition is such a important one and very interesting. And a lot of our seniors and their families are calling us a lot to ask for information and I guess to get comfortable with the idea of their senior passing away. So could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. So my background comes from funeral service. I'm a licensed funeral director. And over the years, I started to identify some gaps in that I was meeting with families and realizing that there were conversations that weren't happening. And what that led to was heartache, regret, just maybe difficulty with end of life. And I thought if I could meet with these families a little bit upstream of the death event itself and really get these conversations going in a supported way, I think this could make for a more positive death experience and really help people to identify their needs, to document them, empower their loved ones to know how to support them, and ultimately help people to make decisions from a point of protecting their loved ones rather than guessing what their wishes might be.
So how long have you been a funeral director, and are you still doing that?
Yeah, I'm still licensed. I got interested in this at a very young age. When I was in high school, a girl at my school died. And it was my first experience of death. It was certainly my first experience of someone my own age dying. I didn't really ever think that kids could die.
Right.
So that really, it sparked an interest in me, and I just needed to know more. Where is her body? What happens now? What are her parents doing? And it prompted me to make a lasagna and bring it to her parents.
That's nice.
And it then further prompted me to start volunteering at a funeral home here in town. I grew up in Victoria. And I hung around the funeral home. They were willing enough to let me not see a whole lot, but see enough that gave me an understanding that this is actually a job that people do. And I was just so impacted by the people I met, being the funeral directors I worked with. Absolutely amazing, heartfelt people that were doing important work. That led me to pursue training. I actually did some volunteering in England at another funeral home over there, and saw, that perspective of how they do things on that side, and then pursued my funeral directing education here in Canada. I got licensed in Alberta, actually. So I worked in a small town funeral home, which was an amazing experience because the guys I worked for knew every family that walked in the door.
Right.
It was a very tight-knit community. The funeral home had been around for over 100 years.
Wow.
And everyone went to funerals. Everyone had a funeral and everyone went to funerals. So they were 100 people was a small gathering, up to 600, 1,000, because everyone was affected. Right. And what I got to witness in that was communities coming together, taking on roles that needed to happen, and a little bit of a blueprint of how to show up. I moved back to Victoria to raise my family, and it's quite different here. We have there's a few things going on. Victoria obviously is much bigger than the small town I was in. It's also a destination place, so a lot of people, there's not whole families living here together. It's also about 97% cremation versus burial.
Okay.
Whereas where I was at was about 50-50 burial and cremation. And the reason I mention that is because there is something very sobering about watching a body go into the ground.
Yeah.
You can't deny it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with cremation, there tends to be, and this is what I have felt in my experience here, is kind of let's just deal with the body as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Okay.
And that's cremation, cost effective. Wonderful if there's something to do with those cremated remains, because they are still sacred, they're still precious, but there's a bit less direction than burial, where you're going to a certain spot. And of course, in the prairies, there are a lot of, family plots or generations that have been buried in the same place. So,
right.
So I found here in Victoria, I personally, in my experience, found it hard to feel as connected in the community. I mean, in my personal life, I'm connected. However, the role of the funeral director isn't as much of a foundation of the community as I experienced it to be when I was in a small town. So again, just trying to slow things down, bring people's engagement back in, and really over the last 100 years, death has become so medicalized and really quite outsourced, to the point that we're not really involved in the care of our dead, or certainly post-death, and that's fine, but there's room for that. That has created fear, and
interesting.
And I
Okay.
think there's a lot of fear around death now.
Yeah.
And I think that can be, I would like to challenge that, and in a safe and comfortable way.
When your friend died when you were a teenager, because my sister passed away last year,
Oh.
and it was a maid assisted death,
Mhm.
and it was just so shocking because they're there and then they're gone, like that. And I think that if we can prepare people of that possible experience that you might have, because it messed me up for months.
Yeah.
They're just gone.
I'm glad you brought that up, because MAID is unique in that it is an expected death, but it's also a sudden death at the same time.
That's right. Yeah, that must be what it was. It was like shocking.
You know it's coming, and maybe there's been a little bit of preparation of what her last day is going to look like and all that, but then it really is one moment she's alive to one moment she's dead.
Right away.
And the only other time that happens is a sudden death, like an accident or or a stroke or heart attack or something like that. So it's and it's new too, right? MAID's only been legal for a few years, so your family, your sister's a pioneer, really, right? Like, it's still a new thing, and so the support. Some families feel some stigma because there's not a lot of people yet that can relate with what you're going through.
Yeah,
So.
and it was also very. I really respect what you're saying about the. It's become mechanical because the doctor comes in with his little bucket, literally, and the nurse, and they're come in. Okay, where are we doing it? It was like an operation or something in their mind. I mean, they have to be desensitized. They're doing a lot now, I think.
Yeah.
But it was really hard on the family that it was just so like, get out of the way, we're doing this, and then no feeling, no, debrief, no talking, even though you're never really, I don't think you're ever really prepared, because we all tried to prepare ourselves. If we had a year, she was very sick. But the whole event was extremely disruptive, and so there's that, and that makes sense with what you're saying about how we're not really. It seems like we're not really feeling that death is sacred. Death is a sacred. To me, it's a sacred transition to a wonderful place.
Yeah,
and that's not what some of the medicalized part is, right?
Well, it's kind of like It's kind of like. Death is a medical event with a social component, whereas it should be flipped around. Death is a social event. It's going to happen to everybody, and we're family structures.
Exactly.
Death is a social event with a medical component. Mm-hmm. So that's where I'm coming in and trying to shift that belief. And with MAID, you're absolutely right. That's where a death doula can come in and provide
Yeah.
some education about what to expect, and maybe a little bit of guidance and ideas as to like how can we prepare for this both before and after, because the physician or nurse practitioner coming in to do the provision, it's not their job to do that. If they're doing a number of made provisions, they can't be engaging with every family because they will burn out pretty darn quick. So that's where somebody else who has that time and that intention to come in, and that's what I would do, is come in and give a bit of what to expect, answer questions, have some family engagement together. And then because of my license as a funeral director and embalmer, I can support with post body care. You know, that if the death has happened at home, there's no rush. We don't have to call the funeral home immediately and have the body taken away. That's still your sister there.
Right.
Just because her soul's gone. And so, you know, do you need a minute to hold her hand or clip her hair or hop into bed and have a snuggle? You know, these are all things that are allowed. And that's where having, you know, a third party to kind of give that gentle direction or suggestions.
Invitation.
Thank you. That's a perfect way to put it. That invitation.
Yeah, because I would feel weird if I hadn't been prepared. Like, I can touch her still, but she's dead. The whole, it's very, and it's so interesting because we are all going there. That's the biggest thing, and yet we're not really talking about it a lot, and we're not prepared for it. We are afraid of the idea of going there, and like, what does it mean? So, on that note, what's the training of a death doula like? Why would we reach out to you? You did say a few things that you could help with. Is there anything else that you could help a family with?
Just one thing I want to touch on that last point before we move on is that we know death's inevitable, and loss is likely inevitable too, but regret is preventable. And that's what these conversations beforehand, I mean, there is a big fear about death and talking about it. I feel like there's almost a superstition that if you talk about death and plan for it, that it's saying you're ready or it's inviting it in. And in my experience, I don't think I've summoned any deaths by talking about it with people. In fact, I think we've just created a lot of resiliency and a lot of peace of mind. And I really believe that this is a subconscious response to this large death event we are starting to go into with the aging of the baby boomers, right? Like, these are the couple of generations immediately following World War II. And this is a generation of people who have redefined every life stage so far.
Hey, for us.
Honestly, it's because of your generation that I enjoy many of the social things that I enjoy today. This is a generation that, you know, youth, counterculture, right? Experimenting with drugs and alcohol.
Making weed legal.
Making weed legal. You know, writing your own wedding vows, bringing back birth midwifery. Even fathers being more involved in the home. I mean, that's paved the way for dads being even more involved now in my generation. In terms of like a focus on autonomy and self-actualization and women in the workplace, divorce becoming legalized. And even now, cannabis and psilocybin being used for end-of-life anxiety. That's huge. MAID becoming legal. Like, you guys are continuing to shake things up all the way through until death.
Until we go.
So let's talk about it. Because if there's ever going to be a generation that's going to reshape how we do death, I think it's this one coming up. And I think just to get back to this death doulas cropping up, I believe that is a subconscious kind of an answer to the call that we are going through a large death event. Like, it's already hitting us. Funeral homes are increasing their numbers every year for the last couple of years. Like, we're seeing it. It's not just on the horizon. The tide is already touching our toes.
Right.
So it's And we're seeing our medical system crumbling, right?
Oh, yeah.
So this is where we need to bring death back into the home.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be able to care for our own at home. We need to be getting more comfortable with that. We need to be having conversations so that family members or representatives or friends can speak on behalf of somebody who can't speak for themselves from a place of knowledge and a place of, not necessarily comfort, but a place of knowing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That raised two questions for me. One was, I want to ask you about because it feels like all the seniors that reach out to us here at our agency, there's a lot of belief systems that maybe they're not even aware that they have, the subconscious belief systems, which is where the fear is coming from, and so then they don't want to talk about it. So is there, I know I've heard of the death cafes. Do you think that would be helpful? Do you have any ideas of what we could do as a community, or we could do even as an agency to create that conversation and promote, to get people to, I'm actually thinking of putting on a workshop, soul collage around, so people can allow their subconscious beliefs to come up with their fear and be able to kind of be, not like to get rid of fear, but more to be comfortable with the fact that, oh, I am actually afraid of this. And then, because awareness is very helpful for letting go of a lot of things and then coming into alignment with what is happening.
Absolutely. I have so many ideas. I'm so excited that you have ideas too.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good.
I mean, I think you're right. Getting creative about teasing out these conversations, because there is a lot of superstition, and whether that's rooted in religion or whether that's just an absolute no blueprint of how to talk about it. I mean, the other thing I think with a baby boomer generation is your parents weren't, from my understanding, weren't the most open with talking about feelings and talking about,
Yeah.
So yes, creative ways. Death Cafe, as you mentioned, is an excellent way of having a no agenda. A death cafe is a gathering. The only thing that is decided on is that there's going to be tea and cake, and we're going to talk about death.
Perfect.
But there's no agenda.
Yeah.
So that's a great way to start. One thing that I've done myself in my work is had a death over dinner.
Oh.
So it's a little bit more structured in that when I have a group, whether it's a group of friends, the first one I did was with my own friends, and nobody was sick. Nobody had anyone ill in the family. It was more so just, let's break the taboo and let's get this started, this conversation. I sent out an email beforehand with a few little videos to watch, just to get us on the same page and kind of something to start talking about, break the ice. And I structured it over a 3-course meal. So they came over to my house. I did an appetizer, main course, dessert, and over each course, we first talked about the videos, and then we talked about, what was coming up for each person, and then at the end, how we then go into our families and bring this up.
I love it.
That ended up birthing another death over dinner with one of my friends and her family. So that I tailored a little bit more to the situation that they were in.
Right.
And what was beautiful that came out of that is we discussed values, and I always take when I'm with a family, I always like to take the spotlight off of the person who's either terminally ill or the elderly parent, whoever we're kind of there for.
Right.
I take the pressure off, and we're all talking about our values.
Perfect.
I want everyone to come away with a bit of a plan.
Yeah.
And to have informed everyone in that family unit what they are, because we're not guaranteed to outlive our parents.
No, yeah.
Unfortunately, and that's super uncomfortable to talk about.
Yeah.
But again, if we can address that, it doesn't even have to be. We don't even have to think about what would happen if that person died, but more so, here's what's important to me. This is what makes my life worth living, and this is what I would deem worse than death or unacceptable to me in terms of treatment.
So how would you, as a death doula, work with a senior who's like, I don't care, I'm not dying, I've got years in me? Because that's kind of what we hear sometimes.
Well, the kind of magical thing of being a neutral third party is often people will open up a little bit more to me than to their family members. Partly, I think that comes from my experience in funeral service. Like, I understand how things work here and can be informative in that way. I'm also not emotionally connected, invested with this person. So I like to get a one-on-one with people away from their families. If we are talking about a particular senior or a couple who are needing to share their information, or the adult children are wanting access to the information, I like to get some one-on-one with both parties, just to establish some trust. And again, it's kind of like ripping off a Band-Aid. It's uncomfortable to talk about, but once it's out there, then it's something that can be talked about.
So you've had some success in supporting people, and
I have.
Oh, that's great. That's good to know.
Yeah,
that's good to know. And the other question I had was around the whole health. Island. We're here in Victoria, so island health. Have you had any relationship with them in terms of what you do, or have you had referrals from them? How is that relationship with, it's sort of like energy healers being able to go into the hospital. Sometimes it's taken quite a while for the medical establishment to be open to other forms of therapies or ideology.
Yeah, for sure. It hasn't really been my focus at this point, in all honesty. As I still kind of build my business, I'm focusing on seniors outside of the medical system, because I believe these conversations can happen outside of the medical system.
Yeah.
That said, with MAID, I have had a little bit of discussion with the support team there, just to provide information on what doulas can do. That exactly as you described with your sister's situation, where if they're identifying that this family maybe could use a little bit more support, and knowing that the nurse practitioner or the physician is not that person.
Right.
Even things like when a MAID, when somebody has died by MAID, and they don't want any family around them, somebody's got to stay with that body until the funeral home comes, and that's not an effective use of time for the nurse.
Right.
So, just to inform this, the team that they can call on a doula to do that if necessary.
So in terms of the survivors, the children or brothers or sisters, or for example, for me, with all the sisters who let go of my sister, what would you do as a death doula to support that?
That's a good question. So I don't come in with any agenda. I'm not here to force you to let go of your person. What I would say to start with is to think about that person, the person you're letting go, and what maybe what makes their life worth living, what their values are. Also, I believe a lot. I have a little cork board at home where I have the pictures of everyone I know who's died, family members, friends, parents of friends, and I feel very much like they're just on that other side. So when I know someone is passing, even if it's somebody I don't know intimately, but it's someone I'm working with, I will kind of let my people know.
Right.
And that might sound a little out there to some people, but that brings me comfort. So I may suggest, who do you know that's over there already?
Right.
And does that maybe create a little bit of comfort? In terms of helping the person who is dying let go, because I have been alongside people who are in the process of dying, and that can last days. Is that idea of like your body's doing exactly what it's meant to do. Our bodies know how to die,
right?
Just like we know how to birth a child, and our body knows how to be birthed into the world. Our bodies know how to die, and it is not a medical emergency, and it's not something going wrong. Yes, our bodies are shutting down, but
that's nature. It's
nature, and it actually there are certain kind of stages that happen, just like in labor of birthing a baby. There's certain stages, and everybody's labor looks completely different.
That's true.
Everybody's death looks completely different, but just that calming reassurance that you're doing a great job. You're doing what you're supposed to do.
I know you have children because you told me, and so have you had any experience or situations come up where you can bring children into the conversation of death? Have you thought about maybe going to the school? Like, it would be a great guidance counseling thing in high school, because we have had people die when they're younger. Have you thought of that? Or?
Yeah, so a few avenues on that question. I talk about this with my kids. They know what I do, and I don't force it on them, but little conversations will crop up. The other day, my son asked where I wanted my ashes scattered.
Wow.
And I said, well, actually, I want to be buried, and I want green burial, and I want to be buried on Salt Spring Island. And he was kind of like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. Well, now you know.
That's super.
Yeah.
Surprise.
Yeah, exactly. It was funny because I followed up. We ended up being on Salt Spring, and I took the kids to the cemetery to say, this is where I want to be. Wow. And my other son said, but I want ashes, because I want to take you and scatter you at different places. And it was like, well,
interesting.
You know what, hun? You do whatever you want. I won't be here anymore. You do what's right for you. I'm telling you so that you have some guidance, because I've seen the opposite, where people don't know what to do, and it can be really heart-wrenching. So do whatever you want. Wow. I'm not going to haunt you if you do the wrong thing.
I love that, because I still do sometimes when I get on a plane. I've always said to my daughters, and they're adults, they're 30, and I go, well, in case I die, because now I'm going away on a plane. Yeah. In case something happens to me, and I'll just say la la la, whatever it is. Yeah. And they were like, don't say that. So that's where the uncomfortability is still happening, because they don't even want to think about me dying. But I think there's so much education we can do for our children. As well, or seems like all ages.
There definitely is education, but interestingly, what I've noted in seeing children at funerals or at visitations where the body's present, and that's not always even a guarantee. Some kids aren't allowed to go, or some parents don't let their kids go to those things. But what I've witnessed time and time again with young children is there is really quite an absence of fear. Kids are just generally curious and might go up and have a peek. Oh, okay, that person's dead. Just like the dead bird that I saw that was on the grass, or just like the dead fly. Yeah. They're so factual at that point. Yeah. And might have a little touch and oh, why is Grandpa cold? Okay, well that's his blood's not moving anymore, and his body doesn't work anymore. Yeah. I think what is really detrimental are euphemisms. For example, I heard a dad say to his daughter, who was probably about 5, we had just finished the burial. I was driving them back to the house, and she said, "Why are we leaving Uncle Jimmy at the cemetery?" And we had just buried him in a vault too, so it was like he's gone. He's in there. And he said, "Oh, don't worry, Uncle Jimmy's just sleeping." I was like, "Oh,
that's so old school."
It's so old school and so terrifying. I mean. Oof, I feel claustrophobic just thinking about it.
It's such a lie.
It's just simply not true.
Right.
But that's coming from his fear.
That's right.
Right? And he's trying to protect his daughter.
But that's where the fear will be passed on. Yeah. Because she won't be comfortable now with it. Because,
Or hopefully she decides with her kids to be open and honest because she,
Yeah, so that brings me to a large topic. Especially since I just went through the whole thing last year and freaked me right out, is grief. Mm. As a society, as our culture, and even Victoria culture, we're not a very emotive society. And if it's not, smiling and happy, people don't usually, I find them very uncomfortable if you're sad or if you're crying. And I feel maybe, and I know for me, it's very vulnerable to be sad and crying and grieving. And so going to a funeral, I actually was I don't go. I hardly ever go. Well, first of all, I don't have to, which is great. But it's because I just want to sob and sob. Yeah. I just feel the grief. And so I think that affects a lot of people as well. And not facing things or not wanting to talk about it is because there's a lot of emotion. And if we're not comfortable with that emotion or being able to process the grief.
I can speak to that on a personal level more. I also have a hard time expressing, I have a hard time expressing emotion. I think it's possibly becoming a funeral director at a young age, and I just got really good at compartmentalizing. Yeah. When my dad died, that was 12 years ago, I went into funeral director mode, and I didn't cry. I couldn't really cry. And when his funeral came, I was hoping to have a chance to release. I figured this is going to be, his friends are going to get up and speak about him. I'll get a chance to really let it out because I can't access that. It's just not coming. I couldn't even squeeze out a tear. I couldn't cry. And afterwards, a friend of mine said, "Oh my gosh, Karla, that was such a sad funeral. The woman beside me actually got up. She couldn't keep it together, so she got up to go to the bathroom." And I was like, what is wrong with this? That somebody couldn't keep it quiet enough, so they had to leave?
Yeah.
And I was like, why would that happen? And she said, well, you guys were all so strong. And I was just thinking, wow, if I had heard somebody let it out, it would have helped me to be able to let it out.
Yeah.
And I've thought, if I ever lead a funeral, I think I will start with that, which is please cry.
Yeah.
It may give somebody else permission.
Yeah.
Living funeral is a wonderful idea because if you think about it, once the funeral happens and it's this chance to get up and speak highly of this person and they don't get to hear it.
Yeah, exactly.
So if they are, the tricky thing with the living funeral is just depending on their wellness and whether they can, how ill they feel. But I mean, you can do it in the living room with the person on the couch. And everyone there is loving and understands that they might need to have a break to have a nap or just might at the last minute have to cancel and say, no, this can't happen today. But as long as it's still all about that person, or maybe it's over Zoom, especially during COVID, or if there is if that person is really immunocompromised, do it over Zoom. Even though it's impersonal, still to be able to see all those faces and have that chance to share memories, and that can actually a little bit be more comfortable for individuals if they're in the comfort of their own home and can mute or whatever and have a little cry. So I have something that I brought to show you. I love these cards. I use these with everybody, and this is again something that I would do with a family all together. Like I've got several. So what I want you to do is have a look at those, and you're going to put them into 3 piles.
Me?
Yes.
Like look at all of them?
Yeah, you can just do them one at a time. You can look at them all, or you can take one at a time, and you're going to put them in 3 piles. The first pile is very important to me. The statement on the card is very important to me.
Okay.
Not important to me at all on the other side. And in the middle can be, is kind of important, but it doesn't stand out as crucial.
Right. Okay, so this is really important, and this is not really important, and this is...
Yeah, very important, not important.
And in the middle.
And in the middle.
Okay.
And take your time with that. The reason
Not dying alone, that's an interesting question.
The one that I find is the thing really interesting about that one is we default to, a lot of people default to dropping everything to make sure somebody's with that loved one in the hospital 24/7.
Right, that's right. We did that with my sister.
Right, and it's not always necessary. Well, then, because the other thing is I'm sure you've heard this too, people who they were with the person 24/7 and then they stepped out of the room to get a coffee
so much.
and the person died. And it does happen so much.
Yeah,
and then,
because they feel free to leave.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Especially because we do labor out of our bodies. Like in some cases it isn't just a simple exhale and you're gone. Sometimes people can have quite what looks like a struggle.
Yeah.
Like whether it looks like they're screaming silently or whether it looks like a real grimace of pain at the end. And that can be very alarming for family members, but also very, very common. And I heard it described so beautifully by Barbara Carnes, who is a hospice nurse in the States. She said that grimace, that end-of-life grimace, is the driver getting out of the vehicle. And so it's a very common physiological, actually, getting out of your body. But to us, it looks like pain.
Yes. Yeah. It's true.
So that's with, I don't think that happens with MAID. That experience, I think it's much more...
It's very gentle because it's like a slow kind of... I think the drugs just takes over and then they just sort of drift, like sleeping.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was... Yeah, interesting. I don't want my friends here.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, for sure.
It's like when I went through that whole thing last year, the grieving, I didn't want anybody near me. It was just like, and everybody grieves differently. That's the thing, right?
It's interesting because when my dad died, his health failed and he was away from home. So we ended up having to travel out to Ottawa.
Yeah.
And we were with him in the ICU in Ottawa for 2 weeks. And we were totally alone. My mom's family came to be with us because they were in Ontario, but we were away from all our community here. And afterwards, when I processed my dad's death, I felt like that was actually perfect. But nobody saw him like that.
Right.
Nobody saw him in that way. None of his friends. Yeah. Whereas if we were here in Victoria, people would have probably come to visit and would have come to spend time, and Dad would not have been Dad would not have wanted to be seen in that condition.
And there's such a thing about, because my sister, I actually I was the opposite. Couldn't be around her because she was not her, and she was she was a very pretty, vain person, as I think most of us are. And I saw her change so physically. It was so heartbreaking to watch. Yeah. So I was uncomfortable. And I don't know how she felt because she never talked about her feelings. We never knew anything about how she was feeling about anything or what she wanted because she didn't talk about it. Yeah. So we were all just stumbling around.
Yeah.
And then we had our own stuff going on. And it was a very awkward, which is why it might have been nice to have a death doula go and meet with her, maybe and just talk to her and say, if you could even write down something to help your.
Once you're done that, I've got another thing to show you, which is exactly that, where it gives somebody a chance to decipher, you know what? Having my hair brushed is important.
Yeah.
For me, my feet are always cold. Like,
and
I want my
people
feet
can't talk about it. They don't, or they don't feel like they shouldn't ask their needs to be met or whatever. So we were all just really awkwardly figuring out what was happening. And it was really, that left the whole event. I mean, the event, that sounds terrible, but with a big pall on it because it wasn't, we all had regret. We had some guilt. Did we do it right?
Yeah.
We don't know because she didn't talk about it and we didn't know how to bring it up and make her uncomfortable. And it was really.
Yeah. That's another thing when I help people write their directives, and I use the term directive for what I do with them, but it's different than your advanced directive. It's quite a lot less formal. But one thing I invite people to write if it resonates with them is just giving family members permission to
have all their feelings,
guilt, and almost let them off and let them off the hook that whatever you do is fine. I forgive you.
Right.
I forgive you.
That's the key.
Yeah. Okay, so you've got your
piles.
You've got your piles. So these are things that are super important to you.
Yeah.
Be mentally aware, have advocate, be able to talk about what scares me. I'm going to put those two together. Be able to talk about what death means, have someone who will listen to me, have funeral arrangements made, financial affairs in order, family prepared, say goodbye, take care of unfinished business, be treated the way I want, not be a burden on my family, be free from anxiety, keep your sense of humor. That one's important to me too.
I'm going to die laughing. Why not?
To trust my doctor, be at peace with God, be free from pain, not being short of breath, to be able to help others, to die at home and to pray. So what I did is I just kind of put it into some themes that you have going, and these would be like really fundamental themes. Mm-hmm. So here are, like, you've got your spirituality is important.
Yeah.
You've also got a real desire to have your family protected, taken care of, have things in order, have things eased for them. Mm-hmm. Also being able to, communication, being able to talk about what's happening, to be able to talk about how you feel, what's to come, what's kind of the best case scenario, what's the worst case scenario, be informed, that kind of thing. And then these are kind of comfort, a bit more medical comfort things.
Yeah.
So
more around like dignity and
exactly. Respect. Totally. And your immediate feelings. And then I put your doctor can go in there. Hopefully that's
I have a good doctor, but who knows by then, because that's 20 years away.
Exactly. 30 at least. And then this was your not important?
Yep.
Okay, so not important. Prevent arguments. Yeah. Well, this is not going to happen because you're going to have your family all organized
Exactly.
anyways.
Yeah.
Remember your accomplishments.
I
Yeah,
don't,
that's
I'm not,
fine.
That's an ego. I don't really care. I'm dying.
Yeah. Have a close friends here. So this,
Yeah, I don't really want.
and this would be an interesting thing to state in your directive so
Yeah.
that your kids know they don't need to summon everyone around you.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they might. They might say,
Right,
oh, you want to
if
have
they
the
don't
last time
know.
with Vicki? Come on and see her for the last time. They might actually be a little bit more protective of like,
Yeah.
thank you, we appreciate your wishes, but we'll pass it along.
Yeah, whereas my sister wanted everybody all the time.
Yeah.
But she,
Yeah.
she never wanted to be alone.
Yeah, and this is the cool thing
great.
about these cards is
Yeah.
everyone I've done these with, totally different. Everyone I've done these with, completely different values.
There's no one way to die.
No, and things are not, people have different values. So to leave it up to your family to decide, and if they have to speak for you, and they're going on basically either what they think yours are
Yeah.
or what is important to them.
Yeah.
So to have this chance to articulate it, I think is
Super.
huge.
Great.
To have a doctor who knows me as a person, I mean, who knows these days?
Although it's kind of like to trust my doctor. Isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah, that could go.
You're kind of the same.
To meet with a clergy, not necessarily if you're
No,
comfortable with
don't
your
we?
own.
Yeah.
And not being connected. Yeah, if you've got to be connected, you've got to be connected. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I use these with everybody. This is my favorite tool because I find
love it.
to be really effective because it breaks it down. I mean, there are so many checklists available online
Oh, yeah.
that you can fill out. They're daunting and let me just tell you, nobody ever does them. Yeah, so I find this, as you saw, like you're looking at the deck one thing at a time and organizing them. And I find it works well with seniors because it's just simplified. Each one is going to maybe bring up a conversation in itself, but it really puts things into chunks, bite-sized chunks.
So how can people get a hold of you?
People can get a hold of me through my website, karlakerr.ca. My name's Karla with a K. And I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. You can look me up the same way. And I'm available by email, connect@karlakerr.ca.
Okay. And then if they want to know the cost and how many sessions or what does that look like?
Yeah, for sure. I always do a complimentary consult. So about 30 minutes by Zoom just to get to know each other and decide if it's a fit and get an idea of what the plan is. Because I do like to tailor my services based on what the needs are, whether this is like an individual or if it's a family. I even do home funerals. So if the death is like, say with maid, for example, if it's a maid death and there's maybe a bit of planning beforehand and then some body care after, all those things factor into the cost. So that's what we talk about at our meeting. And my costs are online as well.
You have been listening to the Blue Book podcast brought to you by Seniors Serving Seniors of Victoria. For more information, you may contact Karla through her website, Victoria Holistic Death Planning, at karlakerr.ca. That's KARLAKERR.ca.